FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Here's me and a bunch of people standing outside the experimental breeder reactor in Idaho Falls, and there's their fuel cycle facility. This is a new type of technology that has the potential to make nuclear energy sustainable over the long term. It's called the fast reactor. Now, the difference between a fast reactor and today's nuclear technology is profound. Today's nuclear technology is called a once-through cycle, or a throwaway cycle. You mine the uranium, you create fuel rods, you run them in the reactor, and then you throw them away, and you have to store them over long periods of time. Whereas a fast reactor cycle with the recycling of the fuel is what's called a closed fuel cycle. And through multiple recycles, you can extract huge amounts of energy from the uranium. So in today's technology, we end up generating around 35 tonnes of high-level waste per year from an average of 250 tonnes of uranium for a 1 gigawatt reactor running for a year. Now, some of that needs to be managed for thousands of years in a long-term repository before it decays to background radiation levels. Whereas in a fast reactor, you require 1 tonne instead of 250 tonnes of mined uranium. And the amount of waste that can be separated out then is quite different. Because all of the long-lived waste is burnt in the reactor, what remains is about 1/50th in volume of current technology, and it requires isolation for no more than a few hundred years rather than tens of thousands of years. But why aren't we going to this sort of technology right now? Well, there are various historical reasons, and one of them is if uranium is cheap and we don't have to make a hard decision on what to do with the nuclear waste, then it can make sense in the short to medium term to simply invest in what we have now, rather than moving to some new technology. As Gus said, it takes time, and it takes many drivers to introduce these new technologies, even if they are much more efficient. So the prospects are great. I mean, if you ran all of your society on these fast reactors, then all of the energy needs for your entire life, your electricity needs, the synthetic fuels that you may generate to replace oil, for your aircraft flights, for your car and so on, for producing all of your food, all of it could be wrapped up in a lump of uranium or thorium the size of a golf ball. That's your footprint for your life. And the waste could fit into a Coke can. It's a little larger than that because you've transmuted that into lighter elements that are less dense. But basically a Coke can that needs to be managed for around 300 years is your legacy of environmental pollution for your entire lifespan under this sort of scheme. Whereas if it's based on coal, then you'll have a very large mountain of coal ash and a vast amount of CO2 floating around in the atmosphere as your legacy. It's my legacy as well. I would just rather it not be the case. And then there's a vast amount of energy that becomes opened up, so that nuclear power becomes one of those inexhaustible energy sources. If we look at current energy reserves in the US, for instance, this slide was made back in 1994, but it illustrates the point. The US has a lot of coal, not much oil and gas left, but if you recycle its uranium fuel, then it has vast amounts more energy than even coal. Indeed, if you were to reprocess all of the nuclear waste that's been generated to date in the US and to use all of its depleted uranium that's sitting around in stockpiles, the US has mined enough uranium already to power all of its energy needs for about 1,000 years before you even need to mine it again.